Y'all, today, August 17th, 2026, nearly 30 years after Tupac Shakur was pow on the Las Vegas Strip, both sides finally stood up in the courtroom and told a jury their version of what happened. Prosecutors called it an act of revenge. The defense called it fiction. And in the middle of it all, jurors just heard about a recording where the man on trial allegedly said he would have pow Tupac himself if he'd just been sitting on the other side of the car. Let's break down exactly what was said today, how we got here, and what it means for the next 4 weeks of this trial. Let's get into it after the intro. If you're just catching up, a man named Duane Davis, known as Keffe D, is on trial for orchestrating Tupac's unaliving. He's 63 years old. He's charged with one count of unaliving with a deadly weapon, with an added allegation that it was done to promote or assist a criminal gang. Now, if convicted, he's facing life without parole. He's been in jail without bail since his arrest in September of 2023. He's pleaded not guilty. Jury selection wrapped last week over 4 days, and today opening statements finally began, meaning both sides laid out for the first time in front of the actual jury exactly what they intend to prove. Now, here's a little backstory and a little history for you, and a quick refresher on what actually happened that night, because it matters for understanding today's statements. Tupac and Suge Knight, the CEO of Death Row Records, were in Las Vegas for a Mike Tyson fight at the MGM Grand. After the fight, there was a physical altercation in the lobby. Tupac and his entourage got into it with a man named Orlando Baby Lane Anderson. That's Duane Davis's nephew. Now, later that night, Tupac and Knight were stopped at a red light in a BMW. A white Cadillac pulled up beside them. Shots rang out into the passenger side. Tupac was unfortunately hit 4 times, one bullet piercing his lungs. He died 6 days later, September 13th, 1996, at 25 years old. Suge Knight was also hit, but he survived. Orlando Anderson, the man prosecutors say actually fired the shot, was unalived in an unrelated pow 2 years later in 1998. He was never charged in Tupac's unaliving while he was still alive. So, who's actually on trial here? Well, Davis was, by his own description, a leader of the Southside Compton Crips. And here's the part of this case that's almost unbelievable. In 2019, he published a memoir called Compton Street Legend, where he laid out in detail his own role in planning the unaliving. He wrote about getting a pow, driving around Las Vegas looking for Tupac and Knight that same night. Now, that book, plus interviews he gave to police and media going back to 2008, is now central to the prosecution's entire case. So, today, Chief Deputy District Attorney Benu Palal stood up and gave the state's opening statement. Here's exactly what he told the jury. He said Tupac was, quote, gunned down in a drive-by pow from a white Cadillac in an act of revenge. He argued Davis had what he called visceral anger at Tupac for years, going back to that fight with his nephew. And then he said something I want you to really sit with, and I quote, when the opportunity presented itself for retribution, Duane Davis made sure that the powers were armed and ready to execute their revenge. But here's the piece of the evidence that stood out to me mostly from today. Prosecutors referenced a recording where Davis allegedly said he would have pow at Tupac and Suge Knight himself if they had pulled up on his side of the vehicle instead. Think about that for a second. That's not just I organized it. That's an admission that he was personally ready and willing to be the power. And the only reason he says he wasn't is basically a matter of which side of the car they were sitting on. Now, that says a lot. But moving on, Palau also walked the jury through the gang backdrop because none of this happened in a vacuum. Suge Knight's Death Row Records used members of the gang Mob Piru as unofficial security. Tupac wasn't a gang member himself, but he was associated with Mob Piru through that connection. Davis, on the other hand, led a rival gang, the Southside Compton Crip. And for those of you who watch my Diddy Files content, this is the same rivalry that's long been rumored to connect back to Sean Combs and Bad Boy Records on the East Coast side of that mid-90s hip-hop gang tension, you guys remember. Nothing in today's statement directly names Diddy now, and I want to be clear about that. But the gang alliance structure prosecutors described today is the exact same one that's fueled these rumors for decades. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Davis's defense attorney, Michael Stamps, chose to give his opening statement immediately rather than waiting until the state rests its case. Now, that's a real strategic choice. He wanted the jury hearing his side right away, not weeks from now. Stamps opened by telling the jury they're going to have to figure out, and I quote, what is fact and what is fiction. His central argument is about timing. He pointed out that Davis allegedly admitted his role in interviews back in 2008 and 2009. So why did it take until 2023 to actually charge him? Here's his exact answer to the jury, and I think it's worth hearing in full quote. Keith was never charged for any of what he said during that time period, and it's because they knew he was full of crap. Ask yourself the reason why that is. Is it because they just didn't care about Tupac Shakur or his life? Or is it because they looked into it and realized we can't verify this information? We don't believe this to be true. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a genuinely clever framing. He's not asking the jury to ignore the confession. He's asking them to ask why prosecutors themselves apparently didn't believe it for 15 years. Sam's overall position is that Davis's book was fictionalized, written for profit, not as a real confession. But one small but interesting detail from the courtroom today, jurors were seen actively taking notes right when Sam made that no charges after the book came out point. That's often a sign a specific argument is actually landing with the jury, though obviously we won't know for weeks. Look, prosecutors aren't walking into this blind to their own challenges. This is a nearly 30-year-old case. Witnesses have passed away. Orlando Anderson, the man Davis says actually pulled the trigger, has been gone since 1998 and can never testify either way. And Suge Knight, one of the few people alive who was actually in that car with Pac, is currently serving a 28-year sentence for an unrelated fatal hit and run. That's not exactly a witness a jury finds easy to fully trust, even if he's called. So, even with Davis's own words as the centerpiece, the state still has a real uphill climb, proving this beyond a reasonable doubt after this many years. So, here's my honest opinion after hearing both sides' opening statements. The prosecution's evidence today hit different than I expected. That detail about Davis saying he would have pow-powed Tupac himself if he'd actually been on the right side of the car, that's not abstract. That's about as close to a personal admission of lethal intent as you can get without an actual trigger pull confession. But I also think Sam's timeline argument is genuinely the strongest card the defense has. 15 years is a long time for prosecutors to sit on a supposed confession if they actually believe it. That's a real question, and it's fair for the jury to sit with it. I think this case comes down to whether the jury believes Davis's own words were a genuine confession or a washed-up gang leader embellishing his legacy for book sales. Both are believable. That's exactly why this is going to be a real trial, not a formality. Prosecution starts calling witnesses next, and this trial is expected to run about 4 weeks. I'll be tracking every major development and bringing you updates as real testimony comes out. Not speculation, only what's actually said in that courtroom. Also, before you go, if you made it this far, you are already part of the royal community. Hit that subscribe button. If hit that subscribe button, like this video if I gave you something to think about today. Share it with somebody who needs to see it. And drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. After hearing both sides today, guilty or not enough evidence? Let me know below. I'll see you in the next video. And it's always, stay Crown Royals. Y'all have a good evening. Bye.